The rain hammered against the windshield as Marcus Sullivan pulled into the parking lot of Sunshine Elementary School. He'd never thought he'd be back here, in the small town of Cedar Falls, Illinois, the place where his dreams had shattered 5 years ago. Before we dive into this heart-wrenching story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, forgiveness, and second chances, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that notification bell. We're almost at 10,000 subscribers, and with your support, we can continue bringing you these emotional stories that touch your heart. Now, let's see what happens when Marcus comes face to face with the impossible. Marcus had returned to Cedar Falls for one reason only: to finalize the sale of his late mother's house. He'd avoided this place like the plague since the divorce, but now he had no choice. The memories were too painful, too raw, even after all these years. As he stepped out of his black BMW, the familiar scent of autumn leaves and childhood nostalgia hit him like a freight train. This was where he'd grown up, where he'd fallen in love, where he'd gotten married in the small church on Maple Street, and where his marriage had ultimately crumbled. The school bell rang, and suddenly the quiet parking lot erupted with the chaos of children rushing toward waiting cars and buses. Marcus pulled his coat tighter against the October chill and hurried toward the main entrance. He needed to pick up some documents from Mrs. Patterson, his mother's longtime friend who worked in the school office. But as he approached the building, something stopped him dead in his tracks. There, standing by the school's front steps, was a woman he'd never expected to see again. Her auburn hair caught the late afternoon sunlight, and even from behind, he'd recognize that graceful posture anywhere. It was Emma, his ex-wife, the woman who'd once been his entire world, the woman who'd walked away from their marriage claiming she couldn't give him the children he desperately wanted. Marcus's heart hammered against his chest as memories flooded back. Emma had been diagnosed with severe endometriosis at 25, shortly after their wedding. The doctors had been blunt. Natural conception would be nearly impossible. They'd tried everything: fertility treatments, IVF, hormonal therapy. Nothing worked. The strain of constant disappointment, medical bills, and the growing distance between them had eventually torn their marriage apart. He could still remember their last conversation, word for word. They'd been sitting in their kitchen, surrounded by pamphlets for adoption agencies and fertility clinics they could no longer afford. Emma had been crying. She'd been crying a lot those last few months. "I can't keep putting us through this," Emma had said through tears on their last night together. "You deserve someone who can give you a family, Marcus. I can't be that person." He'd begged her to stay, told her that she mattered more than having children, but the damage was done. Emma had already made up her mind. She'd packed her bags that same night, and within 6 months, the divorce was final. She'd disappeared from Cedar Falls without a trace, leaving behind only forwarding address for her lawyer and a note that simply said, "I'm sorry, I love you too much to keep hurting you." Now, 5 years later, here she was. Marcus took a step closer, his pulse racing. Maybe he could just say hello, ask how she'd been, keep it casual and brief. But as he approached, he heard something that made his blood freeze in his veins. "Mommy! Mommy! Look what I made in art class!" A small boy with dark hair came running toward Emma, waving a colorful drawing in the air. Marcus stopped breathing. The child looked to be about 4 years old, with Emma's green eyes and a smile that could light up the world. But before Marcus could process what he was seeing, more children appeared. Another boy, identical to the first, then a girl with pigtails, then another boy, then 2 more girls. 6 children total, all around the same age, all calling Emma Mommy. Sextuplets. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The woman who'd claimed she was Barren, who'd destroyed their marriage because she couldn't have children, was standing 20 feet away with 6 kids who were obviously hers. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. The betrayal hit him like a tidal wave, drowning him in confusion, anger, and heartbreak all over again. How was this possible? Had she lied to him? Had she been seeing someone else during their marriage? Had she gotten pregnant immediately after leaving him, proving that he had been the problem all along? The questions crashed through his mind like thunder, each one more painful than the last. He watched, transfixed, as Emma interacted with the children with the ease of an experienced mother. She knew each of their personalities, their needs, their quirks. This wasn't a new relationship. She'd been their mother for years. "All right, my little artists," Emma said, her voice carrying the same musical quality that had once made his heart skip beats. "Let's get everyone buckled into the van. We need to stop by the grocery store before we head home." Van. Of course she'd need a van for 6 children. Marcus watched in stunned silence as Emma efficiently helped each child into a large white minivan. She moved with the practiced choreography of motherhood, checking seat belts, distributing snacks, mediating squabbles, and offering comfort where needed. The children chattered excitedly about their day, and Emma responded to each one with patience and genuine interest. "Tommy, don't forget your science project. Sarah, did you remember to give Mrs. Johnson your permission slip? Alex, stop pulling Lily's hair. Jake and Maya, I know you're tired, but we'll be home soon." She knew their names. She knew their personalities. She knew exactly how to handle each child's individual needs. This wasn't a babysitting arrangement or a daycare pickup. This was a mother with her children. Marcus stood frozen in the parking lot as the van pulled away, his entire worldview crumbling around him. 5 years of believing that Emma had sacrificed their marriage for an impossible dream. 5 years of thinking she'd been noble and selfless in letting him go so he could find someone else to start a family with. 5 years of guilt, wondering if he'd been too selfish in wanting children when she couldn't have them, and all of it had been based on a lie. "Marcus? Marcus Sullivan, is that really you?" He turned to find Mrs. Patterson standing behind him, her elderly face lit up with surprise and delight. She looked exactly the same as she had when he was a student here 25 years ago. Gray hair in a neat bun, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the same warm smile that had comforted countless homesick children over the years. "Mrs. Patterson," he managed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Yes, it's me. I'm here about my mother's house." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your mother was such a wonderful woman. She used to come to all the school events, you know, even after you moved away. Always said she was hoping you'd move back home someday." Mrs. Patterson patted his arm sympathetically, her touch gentle and motherly. "But what brings you to the school? Are you thinking of moving back to Cedar Falls?" Marcus glanced toward the street where Emma's van had disappeared, his mind still reeling from what he'd witnessed. I thought I saw someone I knew. Emma Chen. Does she work here?" Mrs. Patterson's face brightened even more, and Marcus could see the genuine affection in her expression. "Oh yes, Emma's one of our substitute teachers, and she volunteers for everything. PTA, school fundraisers, field trip chaperoning. Such a lovely woman, and those children of hers are absolute angels. She's done such an amazing job raising them all by herself." "By herself?" The words came out sharper than Marcus intended, and he saw Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows raise slightly at his tone. "Well, yes. It's been just her and the children since she moved back to town 3 years ago. I don't know the whole story, but I gather she was married before, and it didn't work out. The father isn't in the picture." Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice conspiratorially, the way small-town people did when discussing sensitive topics. "Between you and me, I think there might be some sort of tragic story there. She never talks about it, but sometimes you can see the sadness in her eyes when she thinks no one's looking, especially when the children ask about their father." Marcus felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. The children asked about their father, which meant they didn't know who he was, or where he was, or why he wasn't with them. "The children, how old are they?" "Oh, they'll be 5 in December. Premature sextuplets, if you can believe it. Emma says it was touch and go for a while there. They spent months in the NICU, but they're all healthy and thriving now. Smartest kids in their grade level, too." Mrs. Patterson's pride in the children was evident. "Tommy's already reading at a 2nd grade level, and little Sarah's artwork is just stunning. Alex keeps us all entertained with his jokes. And Lily knows more about animals than some adults I've met. The twins, Jake and Maya, are quiet but incredibly observant. 5 years old in December." Marcus did the math quickly in his head, his heart pounding as the implications became clear. That would mean Emma had gotten pregnant in March, just a few months after their divorce was finalized in January. The timeline made his head spin with possibilities he wasn't ready to consider. "Are you all right, dear? You look a bit pale," Mrs. Patterson said, concern creeping into her voice as she studied his face. "I'm fine," Marcus lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just tired from the drive." About those documents. After collecting the paperwork from Mrs. Patterson, insurance papers and property deeds that suddenly seemed trivial compared to the bombshell that had just exploded his understanding of the past 5 years, Marcus sat in his car for a long time, staring at the empty school playground. The rusty swings moved gently in the autumn breeze, and he could almost see ghost images of children playing there. His children, maybe. Children who had grown up without knowing him, without him knowing they existed. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly starting to come together, but the picture they formed was almost too incredible to believe. Emma had left him because she thought she couldn't have children, but somehow, shortly after their divorce, she'd conceived sextuplets naturally, something the doctors had said was virtually impossible given her condition. She'd raised them alone for 5 years, never once reaching out to tell him he had children. The anger came first, burning hot in his chest like acid. How dare she keep this from him? These were his children too, weren't they? He had a right to know, a right to be part of their lives. A right to 5 years of birthdays and Christmas mornings and bedtime stories that had been stolen from him. But as the initial rage subsided, other emotions began to surface. Confusion that made his head spin with unanswered questions. Hurt that cut deeper than the original divorce had. And underneath it all, a bone-deep longing he'd thought he'd buried years ago. The desperate desire to be a father, to have the family he'd always dreamed of. Marcus pulled out his phone and did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He searched for Emma's social media profiles. It didn't take long to find her Facebook page, and what he saw there made his heart ache with a pain so sharp it took his breath away. Photos of 6 beautiful children at birthday parties, school events, family outings to the zoo and the park. Emma looked radiant in every picture, surrounded by the family she'd always dreamed of having. There were no photos of a man, no indication of a romantic partner in her life. It really was just her and the children, just as Mrs. Patterson had said. He scrolled through years of memories he'd missed, each photo like a knife to his heart. First steps captured in blurry action shots. First words documented in proud captions. First days of school with 6 little faces beaming at the camera, backpacks almost as big as they were. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper scattered everywhere, and children in matching pajamas. Summer vacations to lakes and beaches, with Emma looking tired but happy as she corralled 6 energetic kids. Soccer games and dance recitals, with Emma cheering from the sidelines like any devoted parent. An entire lifetime of moments that should have included him if these children were indeed his. But were they? The doubt gnawed at him like a physical pain. The oldest boy he'd seen at the school, Tommy, had looked remarkably like Marcus had as a child. The same dark hair that refused to lie flat, the same serious expression, the same stubborn chin that his own mother had always said would get him in trouble someday. But resemblance wasn't proof. Emma could have moved on quickly after their divorce, found someone else, gotten pregnant almost immediately. The timing would be close, but it was possible. Marcus started his car and drove aimlessly through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, his mind churning with possibilities and scenarios. He could confront Emma directly, demand answers and explanations. He could hire a private investigator to find out more about her life over the past 5 years. He could get a lawyer involved and demand paternity tests. But as he turned onto Elm Street, where he and Emma had once shared a small blue house with white shutters and dreams of filling it with children, he saw something that made him pull over immediately. The same white minivan from the school was parked in the driveway of a modest 2-story home 3 blocks from their old house. Through the large front window, he could see warm light spilling out into the gathering dusk. And there, silhouetted against the light like a scene from a Norman Rockwell painting, was Emma helping the children with what looked like homework around the kitchen table. It was everything he'd ever wanted, everything he'd dreamed of during those long, painful months of fertility treatments and dashed hopes. The family dinner table surrounded by children, homework spread out in organized chaos, a mother patiently helping each child with their individual needs. but it was happening without him, in a life he'd been completely excluded from. Marcus sat in his car, watching the domestic scene unfold through the window like a movie he'd been denied the chance to star in. The children were animated, obviously telling Emma about their day at school. She listened intently to each one, offering encouragement and help where needed. When Tommy struggled with what looked like a math problem, she sat beside him and worked through it step by step. When Sarah showed her an art project, Emma's face lit up with genuine pride and delight. It was clear she was an incredible mother, patient, loving, completely devoted to their well-being. The children obviously adored her, competing for her attention in the way that siblings do, but always respectful and kind. This wasn't a stressed single mother barely hanging on. This was a woman who had found her calling and was thriving in it. But the question that tormented him remained. Why had she hidden this from him? As if summoned by his thoughts, Emma suddenly looked up from the homework table and glanced toward the window. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their eyes met across the distance and through the glass. Marcus saw her face go completely white with shock, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture of surprise he remembered all too well. She said something quick to the children and moved away from the window, disappearing from view. Marcus's phone buzzed almost immediately with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Coffee shop on Main Street tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone." It had to be Emma. She still had his number after all these years. Marcus drove back to his hotel room in a daze, his mind spinning with everything he'd seen and learned. He barely slept, tossing and turning as he wrestled with 1,000 different scenarios for tomorrow's conversation. By morning, he'd rehearsed everything he wanted to say, all the questions he needed answered, all the accusations he wanted to hurl at her, all the pain and confusion and anger that had been building up since yesterday afternoon. But when he walked into the familiar coffee shop, where they'd once spent countless weekend mornings during their marriage, reading the paper and planning their future together, all his prepared words died in his throat. Emma sat in their old corner booth, looking smaller and more fragile than he remembered. She'd always been petite, but now she seemed almost ethereal, as if she might disappear if he looked at her too directly. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd slept as poorly as he had. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup as if seeking warmth, and he noticed they were trembling slightly. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly as he slid into the seat across from her, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma." He studied her face, searching for some sign of the woman he'd once loved more than life itself. She was still beautiful, but there was a wariness in her expression that hadn't been there before, a guardedness that spoke of hard-won lessons and difficult choices. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years and countless unspoken words hanging between them like a physical barrier. The coffee shop buzzed with the morning rush. Business people grabbing quick caffeine fixes, retirees meeting for their daily social hour, young mothers with toddlers in tow. Normal life happening all around them while their world tilted on its axis. "I saw you yesterday," Marcus said finally, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "At the school." Emma nodded, her knuckles white where she gripped the coffee cup. "I know. Mrs. Patterson told me you were in town. She mentioned that you asked about me." 6 children, Emma. 6. He couldn't keep the accusation out of his voice, couldn't hide the raw pain that had been eating at him for 18 hours. "The woman who told me she could never have children, who walked away from our marriage because she was barren, has 6 kids who call her mommy." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. When she spoke, her voice was steady, despite the emotion he could see in her face. "I know how it must look." "Do you?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice rising despite his efforts to control it. Several other customers glanced their way, but he didn't care. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to see that? To realize that everything you told me, everything that destroyed our marriage, was apparently a lie?" "It wasn't a lie," Emma said firmly, finally meeting his gaze with a flash of the strength he remembered. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me. Really listen, because what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to believe, and I need you to hear the whole story before you judge me." He crossed his arms and leaned back in the booth, waiting. Part of him wanted to storm out, to nurse his anger and pain in private. But a bigger part, the part that had never stopped loving her, needed to understand. Emma took a shaky breath and began. After our divorce was finalized, I was in a very dark place. The darkest place I'd ever been in my life. I'd lost you, lost our marriage, lost any hope of ever having the family we dreamed of together. I was seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, to help me deal with the depression and guilt that was consuming me. Chen? That's your last name now. Sarah became more than my therapist, Emma continued, her voice growing softer with memory. She became my friend, my lifeline, really. And eventually, she and her husband David became like family to me. They couldn't have children either, Marcus. David had a rare genetic condition that made conception impossible for them. They'd been trying for years, going through their own heartbreak and disappointment. Marcus felt his anger wavering, replaced by confusion. What does this have to do with... Sarah had this idea, Emma interrupted. She'd been researching experimental treatments for severe endometriosis, something that had shown promise in small clinical trials. The treatment involved stem cell therapy combined with intensive hormone regulation. It was cutting-edge, expensive, and had only about a 5% success rate, but Sarah thought I'd be a good candidate. So what happened? Emma's tears were flowing more freely now, but she continued speaking. I had no money for something like that, no insurance coverage for experimental treatments. The cost was astronomical, nearly $200,000, and that didn't include travel and living expenses. But Sarah and David offered to pay for everything. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Why would they do that? Because they wanted to adopt any children I might have if the treatment worked. Emma's voice broke slightly. They'd been trying to adopt for years with no success. Too old for domestic adoption, wait lists stretching decades for international adoption. This seemed like a miracle solution for all of us. If I could get pregnant, they'd have the family they'd always wanted, and I'd be giving life to children who would be loved and cherished. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to hear the rest of the story. The implications were staggering. I went to Switzerland 6 months after our divorce, Emma continued, her voice becoming stronger as she told her story. The treatment was brutal. Months of procedures, medications that made me violently ill, constant monitoring and testing. There were times I wanted to quit. Times I thought I was going to die from the side effects. But somehow, against all medical odds, it worked. My reproductive system began functioning normally for the first time in my adult life. And you got pregnant. With sextuplets. Emma's laugh was bitter and hollow. The doctors said it was a 1 in a million occurrence, possibly triggered by the intensive hormone treatments. My body had gone from being completely unable to conceive to releasing multiple eggs in a single cycle. Sarah and David were ecstatic. They'd gone from hoping for 1 child to potentially having 6. Marcus felt his world shifting again. But something went wrong. Emma nodded, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer when I was 7 months pregnant. It had been growing silently, aggressively, and by the time they caught it, it was already too late. She fought so hard, went through every treatment available, but she died 3 weeks before the babies were born. The coffee shop seemed to fade away around them. Marcus could only stare at Emma as the magnitude of what she'd been through began to sink in. David was devastated, Emma continued. He'd lost the love of his life. And suddenly he was facing the prospect of becoming a single father to 6 newborns. He tried, Marcus. He really did. He was there for the birth, held each baby, tried to bond with them, but the grief was too much. Every time he looked at them, all he could see was Sarah and what they'd lost. So he walked away. He signed over his parental rights to me when the babies were 6 weeks old and moved to Australia to start over. I couldn't blame him. He was drowning in grief, and seeing the children was just a constant reminder of everything he'd lost. Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process the enormity of what Emma had been through. So you raised them alone. I had no choice. They were my biological children, but I'd never planned to be their mother. I'd spent 9 months preparing to give them to Sarah and David, emotionally distancing myself so the separation wouldn't destroy me. But suddenly there I was, 26 years old, alone in Switzerland with 6 premature babies who needed round-the-clock care. My God, Emma, those first 2 years were the hardest of my life, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. 6 babies with different needs, different schedules, different medical issues from being born so early. Tommy had reflux that kept him screaming for hours. Sarah had breathing problems that required a monitor. Alex was colicky and never slept. I was getting maybe 2 hours of sleep a night, living on takeout and coffee, barely keeping my head above water. Marcus could see the exhaustion in her face even now, years later, as if telling the story was bringing back all those sleepless nights and overwhelming days. I almost had a complete breakdown when they were 18 months old. I was so tired, so overwhelmed, so isolated. I had no family support, no friends who understood what I was going through. There were days I thought about calling social services, seeing if they could place the children with families who could give them what they deserved. But you didn't. I couldn't. They were mine, Marcus. Not by choice, not by plan, but they were mine. And despite everything, the exhaustion, the financial stress, the complete upheaval of my life, I loved them. I loved them so much it scared me. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. A wall he'd built around his heart 5 years ago, beginning to crumble. Why didn't you tell me? If they're my children, I wasn't sure they were, Emma interrupted, her voice urgent. The timing was close, but the fertility treatments had affected my cycle so much that I couldn't be certain. And even if they were yours, what right did I have to show up in your life with 6 babies after I'd walked away claiming I could never give you children? Every right, Marcus said fiercely. If they're mine, you had every right. I had every right to know. Did I? Emma's voice rose slightly, and he could see the guilt and pain she'd been carrying for years. Marcus, you'd moved on. You had a right to your new life, your fresh start. How could I show up with 6 babies and destroy that? How could I ask you to give up everything to help me raise children I wasn't even sure were yours? I never moved on, he said quietly, the admission hanging in the air between them. I tried, Emma. God knows I tried, but I never got over losing you. Emma stared at him in shock, her coffee cup forgotten in her hands. But I heard people in town said you were engaged to someone in Chicago, a lawyer, someone successful and beautiful who could give you everything I couldn't. I was engaged, briefly. Her name was Catherine. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, remembering those painful months of trying to build a life with someone who wasn't Emma. She was everything you described, successful, beautiful, from a good family. She wanted children too, had no fertility issues, would have been the perfect wife and mother. What happened? I kept comparing her to you. Every laugh, every gesture, every conversation. She wasn't you, Emma. She could never be you. I broke off the engagement 6 months before the wedding because it wasn't fair to either of us. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and regret. There was no one else after that, Marcus continued. A few dates here and there, but nothing serious. I threw myself into work, traveled constantly, tried to convince myself I was happy living alone. But I wasn't. I was just existing. They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in thoughts of what might have been, paths not taken, choices that had shaped their lives in ways they'd never intended. Marcus, Emma said finally, her voice barely audible, I need to tell you something else. Something I should have told you years ago. He looked up, noting the fresh fear in her eyes. Emma reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table between them with trembling hands. I had paternity tests done 2 years ago. I needed to know, for their sake and mine, for the children's medical records, for their future, for my own peace of mind. Marcus stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Whatever was inside would change everything, one way or another. Open it, Emma whispered. With hands that shook almost as badly as hers, Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out 6 DNA test results. His eyes scanned the technical jargon and percentages until he found the conclusion he was looking for. 99.9% probability that Marcus Sullivan was the biological father. All 6 tests showed the same result. He stared at the papers, trying to process the reality of suddenly having 6 children he'd never met, never held, never been a father to. Children who had taken their first steps without him, said their first words to someone else, had nightmares he'd never soothed and accomplishments he'd never celebrated. Joy, terror, anger, and love crashed through him in waves, each emotion so intense he felt like he might drown in them. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Because they deserve to know their father, and you deserve to know them." Emma's voice was stronger now, more certain. "I've been selfish, keeping this secret. I told myself I was protecting everyone. Protecting you from a burden you didn't ask for, protecting the children from potential rejection, protecting myself from having to face what I'd done. But seeing you yesterday, seeing how shocked and hurt you were, I realized I couldn't keep running from the truth." Marcus looked up from the papers to find Emma watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What do you want from me, Emma? What happens now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. You could hate me for what I've done, and I'd understand completely. You could demand full custody, and legally you'd probably win, given that I kept the children from you for 5 years. Or you could walk away and pretend this conversation never happened. Is that what you want? For me to walk away?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for the children." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes. And for the first time since he'd sat down, he saw a glimpse of the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Vulnerable, honest, brave enough to tell the truth even when it hurt. "What I want," she said softly, "is impossible. I want to go back in time and handle everything differently. I want to have found a way to include you in their lives from the beginning. I want to undo the hurt I've caused in the years we've all lost. But I can't do any of that. What about now? What do you want now?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper when she answered. "I want you to meet them. I want them to know their father. I want them to have the chance to love you and be loved by you. And if I'm being completely honest, I want the chance to earn your forgiveness, even though I know I don't deserve it." Marcus felt something shift inside him, the anger and hurt beginning to give way to something else. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of hope. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Emma. It's too big, too overwhelming. 5 years of their lives that I'll never get back. 5 years of being a father without knowing it. I understand, but I want to meet them. I want to know my children." The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "I want to be their father, if they'll have me." The relief that washed over Emma's face was unmistakable, like watching someone take their first breath after nearly drowning. "Really? Really, but we do this slowly, carefully. I won't have them confused or hurt because we can't figure out how to handle this situation like adults." "Of course, whatever you think is best." They spent the next hour working out a plan, their conversation becoming more practical and less emotionally charged as they focused on the children's needs. Marcus would extend his stay in Cedar Falls indefinitely, finding temporary housing and arranging to work remotely. Emma would gradually introduce him to the children as a friend from her past, someone who wanted to get to know them. They'd take it one day at a time, letting the relationship develop naturally before revealing the full truth about their connection. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Emma touched his arm gently, and he was surprised by how familiar and right her touch still felt after all these years. "Marcus, for what it's worth, I never stopped loving you. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted it. Not because of the children, but because I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." He looked down at her hand on his arm, remembering how right it had once felt to have her touch him like that, how safe and loved and complete he'd felt in her presence. "I never stopped loving you either," he admitted, the words coming out more easily than he'd expected. "But love might not be enough this time, Emma. Too much has happened. Too much time has passed. I know, but maybe it's a start." That afternoon, Marcus found himself standing on Emma's front porch, more nervous than he'd ever been in his life. Through the window, He could see the children in the living room, playing what looked like an elaborate board game. Their laughter drifted through the glass, and his heart clenched with a mixture of longing and terror. These were his children, his flesh and blood, carrying his DNA, his features, possibly his personality traits and quirks. But they were also strangers to him, with 5 years of experiences and memories that didn't include him at all. Emma opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been watching for him. "They're excited to meet you," she said quietly. "I told them you were a very special friend of mine who wanted to say hello." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. His palms were sweating, and he felt like a teenager on his first date, rather than a successful businessman who regularly gave presentations to rooms full of executives. "Kids," Emma called into the living room, her voice warm and inviting. "Come meet my friend Marcus." 6 pairs of eyes turned toward him, and Marcus felt like he was looking into a funhouse mirror of his own childhood. The resemblances were unmistakable now that he was looking for them. Tommy had his dark hair and serious expression, the same intense focus Marcus remembered having as a child. Sarah had Emma's auburn curls, but his green eyes and her delicate features were a perfect blend of both parents. Alex was clearly the class clown, grinning widely and bouncing on his toes with an energy that reminded Marcus of his own childhood restlessness. Lily was quiet and thoughtful, clutching a worn stuffed animal, a rabbit with faded pink fur that had obviously been loved nearly to pieces. She watched him with careful assessment, as if trying to figure out whether he could be trusted. The twins, Jake and Maya, hung back shyly but watched him with obvious curiosity, whispering to each other in what sounded like their own private language. "Hi there," Marcus said, crouching down to their level so he wouldn't seem so imposing. "I'm Marcus. Your mom has told me so many wonderful things about all of you." "Are you Mommy's boyfriend?" Alex asked with the bluntness that only a 4-year-old could manage, causing Emma to blush furiously and the other children to giggle. Marcus couldn't help but smile at the question. "No, I'm just a friend, but I'd love to be friends with all of you too, if that's okay." "Do you like games?" Tommy asked, sizing him up with an expression so familiar it made Marcus's chest ache. It was the same look Marcus used to give adults when he was trying to determine whether they were worth his time and attention. "I love games. What are you playing?" "Candyland," Lily said, speaking up for the first time, her voice soft and musical like Emma's. "But Alex keeps trying to cheat." "I do not," Alex protested with theatrical indignation, which sent all 6 children into giggles that filled the room with warmth and joy. Marcus spent the next 3 hours on Emma's living room floor, playing board games and listening to the children tell him about school, their friends, their favorite movies, their pet goldfish named Nemo, and their elaborate plans for Halloween costumes. They were brilliant, funny, kind children, each with distinct personalities and interests that fascinated him. Tommy was clearly the intellectual of the group, asking sophisticated questions about Marcus's work and showing him a collection of rocks he'd found in the backyard, each one carefully labeled with its geological properties. Sarah showed him her artwork, drawings and paintings that displayed remarkable talent for someone so young. Alex entertained him with jokes and magic tricks, desperate for approval and applause. Lily shared her extensive knowledge of animals, particularly horses, and made him promise to help her convince Emma to let her take riding lessons. Jake and Maya were harder to draw out, but gradually they warmed to him, showing him the elaborate Lego cities they'd built together and explaining the complex rules of the games they'd invented. They had an almost telepathic connection, finishing each other's sentences and communicating with looks and gestures that spoke of a bond deeper than ordinary sibling relationships. With every passing minute, Marcus fell more deeply in love with each of them. They were everything he'd ever dreamed his children might be. Smart, creative, funny, kind, curious about the world around them. But they were also so much more than his dreams had ever encompassed, each one a unique individual with their own thoughts and feelings and perspectives on life. When it was time for him to leave, Tommy walked him to the door with the same serious expression he'd worn during their first meeting. "Marcus?" the little boy said quietly, tugging on Marcus's sleeve to get his attention. "Yeah, buddy. You seem really nice. Will you come back?" Marcus knelt down so they were eye to eye. his heart breaking with love for this serious, thoughtful child who was so clearly his son. "Would you like me to come back?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "Yeah, Mommy seems happier when you're here. She smiles more, and she doesn't get that sad look in her eyes like she usually does." The observation was so mature, so perceptive, that Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. "What sad look?" "The one she gets sometimes when she thinks we're not watching, like she's missing something important." Tommy glanced back toward the living room, where Emma was helping the other children clean up their games. "I think maybe she's been missing you." That night, Marcus called his business partner in Chicago and arranged to work remotely for the foreseeable future. He extended his hotel reservation for a month, then found a furnished apartment to rent on the other side of town. Whatever was going to happen with this impossible situation, he wasn't going to figure it out from 3 states away. He also called his lawyer not to pursue custody or legal action, but to understand his rights and options. The conversation was sobering. Legally, he could demand immediate full custody based on Emma's concealment of the children's existence. But the lawyer also warned him that such a move would likely traumatize the children and destroy any chance of building a healthy, co-parenting relationship with Emma. "What's your end game here, Marcus?" his lawyer asked. "What do you actually want to achieve?" It was a good question, and one Marcus had been wrestling with since his conversation with Emma. What did he want? Revenge for the years he'd lost? Legal vindication of his rights as a father? Or something more complicated, a chance to build relationships with his children and maybe, possibly, find a way to forgive the woman who had hurt him so deeply? Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a regular fixture in the children's lives. He attended soccer games where Tommy played goalie with intense focus, and Alex provided color commentary that kept the sidelines in stitches. He went to school plays where Sarah starred as a singing flower and Lily played a very convincing tree. He helped with homework, learning that each child had different learning styles and academic strengths. Tommy excelled at math and science, but struggled with reading comprehension, getting frustrated when stories didn't follow logical patterns. Sarah was a natural artist but needed encouragement in subjects that required more structured thinking. Alex was brilliant but easily distracted, needing constant redirection to stay focused on tasks. Lily was methodical and careful, rarely making mistakes but taking longer to complete assignments because she wanted everything to be perfect. Jake and Maya were fascinating to watch. They seemed to share not just thoughts but emotions, becoming upset when separated for different activities and calming each other with a kind of wordless communication that even Emma didn't fully understand. Slowly, carefully, Marcus and Emma began to rebuild some kind of relationship. Not romantic, that was too complicated, too fraught with history, but something deeper than friendship. They were co-parents now, united in their love for the children and their determination to give them the stable, loving home they deserved. There were difficult moments, times when Marcus felt overwhelmed by everything he'd missed, everything he couldn't get back. Times when Emma struggled with guilt and fear that he would try to take the children away from her. Times when the children asked innocent questions that revealed how much they'd wondered about their father over the years. But there were also moments of unexpected joy, when Tommy finally mastered a difficult math concept and looked to Marcus for approval with shining eyes. When Sarah drew a picture of their family that included Marcus standing beside Emma with all 6 children around them. When Alex told a joke that made Marcus laugh so hard he snorted, sending the boy into paroxysms of delight. The first twist came on a Tuesday evening in November. Marcus was helping Tommy with his math homework while Emma prepared dinner in the kitchen. The other children were scattered around the living room, engaged in various activities. Sarah drawing at the coffee table, Alex building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions, Lily reading a book about horses, and the twins working on a puzzle together. It was a scene of comfortable domestic chaos, the kind Marcus had dreamed of for years but never thought he'd experience. He was explaining long division to Tommy when the little boy suddenly looked up at him with those familiar green eyes. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" Tommy glanced around the room as if checking to make sure the other children were occupied, then leaned closer to Marcus. "Are you our daddy?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He and Emma had planned to wait until after the holidays to have this conversation, wanting to give the children more time to get comfortable with his presence before dropping such a life-changing revelation on them. But Tommy had always been perceptive beyond his years, and Marcus realized he should have expected this moment would come sooner rather than later. Emma, who had been stirring something on the stove, went completely still. The other children, sensing something important was happening, gradually stopped their activities and turned their attention to Marcus and Tommy. Marcus looked across the room at Emma, who nodded almost imperceptibly, her face pale but determined. "What makes you ask that, Tommy?" "Well," Tommy said with the logical precision of a future scientist, "you look like me, and Sarah looks like you too. And Mommy gets that special smile when she looks at you, the one she has in the pictures from when she was younger." Marcus felt his throat close up. "You're a very smart boy, Tommy." "So are you. Our daddy?" Marcus glanced around the room at 5 other little faces watching him intently, waiting for an answer that would change their understanding of their family, their history, their place in the world. "Yes, Tommy, I am your daddy." The room exploded into chaos. Alex whooped with joy and launched himself into Marcus's arms, nearly knocking him over. Sarah started crying happy tears and ran to Emma for comfort and reassurance. Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter and stared at Marcus with wide, uncertain eyes. The twins looked confused but pleased, whispering rapidly to each other in their private language. And Tommy just smiled, a big, satisfied smile, as if he'd solved a particularly challenging puzzle. "I knew it," he said proudly. "I knew you were our daddy." "How did you know?" Marcus asked, gathering as many children as he could into his arms. "Because you love us," Tommy said simply, "and we love you. That's what daddies and kids do." The next few hours were a whirlwind of questions, emotions, and explanations. Marcus and Emma sat the children down and told them an age-appropriate version of the story, that Marcus and Emma had been married before the children were born, that they'd gotten divorced but still loved each other very much, and that Marcus hadn't known about the children until recently. The children's reactions varied widely. Alex was thrilled to have a daddy and immediately began planning all the things they would do together. Sarah was more cautious, asking whether this meant Marcus would live with them now and whether he would leave again. Lily wanted to know if this meant she could call him Daddy instead of Marcus, and when he said yes, she promptly climbed into his lap and fell asleep. Tommy had the most complex reaction, asking detailed questions about why Marcus hadn't been there before and whether he was going to stay now. The twins seemed to take the news in stride, more interested in whether Marcus knew how to play their favorite games than in the implications of his paternal status. That night, after the children were in bed and the house had finally settled into quiet, Marcus and Emma sat in the kitchen with cups of tea, both emotionally exhausted by the evening's revelations. "That went better than I expected," Emma said quietly. "They're amazing kids, Emma. You've done an incredible job with them." "We've done an incredible job," she corrected, and Marcus felt something warm unfurl in his chest at her use of the plural pronoun. "What happens now?" he asked. "Practically speaking, I mean. Do I keep staying in the apartment? Do we need to figure out some kind of custody arrangement?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if it might hold the answers to their complicated situation. "What do you want to happen?" she asked finally. "I want to be their father, really be their father, not just a weekend visitor or every other holiday participant. I want to be here for the important stuff and the everyday stuff. I want to help with homework and discipline and medical appointments and all the mundane, wonderful parts of raising children. And what about us? You and me?" Marcus looked across the kitchen table at the woman who had once been his whole world, who had broken his heart so completely he'd thought it would never heal, who was now the mother of his children and his partner in the most important job either of them would ever have. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I know I still love you, Emma. I probably never stopped loving you. But I also don't know if I can trust you the way I used to. What you did, keeping the children from me for 5 years, that's not something I can just forget or forgive overnight." Emma nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I understand. I know I broke something between us that might not be fixable. But Marcus, I want you to know that keeping the secret from you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every milestone, every birthday, every Christmas morning, I thought about you. I wondered what you were doing, whether you were happy, whether you would have wanted to be there. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was a coward, she said simply. I was terrified that you'd hate me for what I'd done. Terrified that you'd try to take them away from me. Terrified that you wouldn't want the responsibility of 6 children you'd never planned for. And the longer I waited, the harder it became to reach out. They talked until nearly 3 in the morning, hashing out practical arrangements and emotional boundaries. Marcus would move into the guest room temporarily while they figured out a more permanent solution. They would share parenting responsibilities as equally as possible, making major decisions together and presenting a united front to the children. And they would both enter therapy, individually and together, to work through the complex emotions and trust issues that lay between them. The second twist came 3 weeks later, just before Christmas. Marcus had been living in Emma's guest room for 2 weeks, and despite the unconventional circumstances, they'd begun to feel like a real family. The children had adjusted to having their father in their daily lives with remarkable resilience, and Marcus had thrown himself into the role with enthusiasm and dedication. He'd learned their morning routines and bedtime rituals, figured out who needed help with which subjects, and discovered that he had a natural talent for mediating sibling disputes with fairness and patience. Emma had been gradually letting him take on more parenting responsibilities, and they developed an easy rhythm of shared duties that felt surprisingly natural. But on a snowy Saturday morning in December, everything changed again. Marcus woke up early and went downstairs to start breakfast, a weekend tradition he'd established with the children. He was mixing pancake batter when he heard Emma being sick in the powder room off the kitchen. At first, he thought nothing of it. She'd been fighting what she claimed was a mild stomach bug for the past week, but when he heard her retching again 20 minutes later, alarm bells went off in his head. "Emma!" He knocked softly on the bathroom door. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," came her muffled reply, but her voice lacked conviction. When she emerged from the bathroom 10 minutes later, she was pale and shaky, gripping the doorframe for support. "You don't look fine," Marcus said, studying her face with concern. "Maybe you should see a doctor. This stomach thing has been going on for over a week." "It's just stress," Emma said, but even as she said it, Marcus could see doubt flickering in her eyes. "Mommy, you've been sick every morning this week," Sarah observed with a child's brutal honesty as she wandered into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis as a possibility he hadn't even considered suddenly crashed into his consciousness. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carefully controlled, "when was your last period?" Emma went completely still, her hand flying to her throat in the gesture of shock he remembered so well. 6 weeks ago? Maybe 7? But Marcus, that's not possible. The doctors said the endometriosis came back after the sextuplets were born. My cycles have been irregular ever since. I can't. But even as she said it, Marcus could see the truth dawning in her eyes, the same realization that was making his own heart race. "We need to find out for sure," he said. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom counter like an unexploded bomb, neither of them quite ready to face what it might reveal. They'd sent the children to play in the basement playroom, claiming they needed to have an adult conversation. "I can't do this again," Emma whispered, staring at the unopened test kit. "Marcus, I can barely handle 6 children. How could I possibly manage 7? "Hey," Marcus said softly, taking her hands in his. "Whatever this test says, we'll figure it out. Together. What if something goes wrong? What if the pregnancy complications affect my ability to care for the children I already have? What if my body can't handle another pregnancy after what it went through with the sextuplets? Then we'll deal with that too. Emma, you're not alone anymore. Whatever happens, we're in this together." The test was positive. They sat on the bathroom floor staring at the little pink plus sign that represented their future. Their 7th child, another completely unexpected turn in their already complicated story. 7 children, Emma said faintly. "We're going to have 7 children." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this new reality. Just 2 months ago, he'd thought he would never be a father. Now he was not only the father of 6 amazing kids, but he was about to have another child with the woman he'd never stopped loving. "How do you feel about that?" he asked, searching Emma's face for any sign of what she was thinking. Emma was quiet for several minutes, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. I'm terrified, she admitted finally. Absolutely terrified. But Marcus, when I was pregnant with the sextuplets, I was doing it for Sarah and David. I was just the vessel, the surrogate. I never let myself imagine what it would be like to have a baby with someone I loved, someone who wanted to be there for every moment. I want to be here for every moment, Marcus said firmly, meaning every word. All of it. The morning sickness, the weird cravings, the doctor's appointments, the middle of the night kicks that keep you awake. I want to be the partner I should have been the first time around. Even though we're not married, even though we haven't figured out what we are to each other beyond co-parents. Marcus took Emma's hands in his, looking directly into her eyes. Emma, I've been thinking about this for weeks. About us, about the children, about what we want our family to look like going forward. And I know this is crazy, given everything we've been through. I know we're doing everything backward and upside down. But Emma, I love you. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day in the 5 years we were apart. I love our children. All 6 of them, and this new one too. And I want us to be a real family. Emma stared at him in shock. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to give us another chance. A real chance this time, with no secrets, no lies, no running away when things get difficult. I'm asking you to marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making up for the years we lost. Marcus, I know it's a lot. I know we have work to do, trust to rebuild, issues to resolve. But Emma, what we have with those kids, that's not something you can fake or force. We work together. We're good together. We always were, even when everything else was falling apart. Emma pulled her hands free and stood up, pacing the small bathroom as she had during so many difficult conversations during their first marriage. This is insane, she muttered. We're talking about marriage when I'm pregnant with your 7th child. And we've only been back in each other's lives for 2 months. I know it sounds crazy. Crazy doesn't begin to cover it. Emma stopped pacing and looked at him, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. But you're right about one thing. We are good together. And those children need stability. They need to know that their family is solid, that we're committed to making this work no matter what. Is that a yes? Emma smiled through her tears, the first genuinely happy smile he'd seen from her since this whole complicated journey began. That's a yes, but I have conditions. Name them. We do this right this time. Counseling together and separately. Complete honesty about everything. Our fears, our expectations, our concerns. No more secrets between us, ever. And if we're going to get married, I want to do it soon. I want our 7th child to be born into a complete, committed family. Marcus stood up and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the tiny bathroom as joy and relief and love flooded through him. Emma Sullivan, he said, setting her down gently and resting his forehead against hers. I love the sound of that. Well, it'll be Emma Sullivan Chen, actually, she corrected with a watery smile. I'm keeping Sarah's name as part of mine. She gave me everything. My children, my chance at motherhood, my path back to you. I won't forget that. Emma Sullivan Chen it is, Marcus agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like tears and hope and new beginnings. They were married on Valentine's Day in the same small church where they'd exchanged vows 8 years earlier. This time, 6 children served as their wedding party. Tommy as the ring bearer, Sarah as the flower girl, and the other 4 as honorary attendants who couldn't stop giggling throughout the ceremony. Emma was 5 months pregnant and glowing, her dress carefully chosen to accommodate her growing belly while still making her feel beautiful. The ceremony was simple but perfect, witnessed by the entire town of Cedar Falls and filled with the kind of joy that only comes from second chances and hard-won wisdom. Do you, Marcus Sullivan, take Emma to be your wife, in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, for richer and for poorer, for better and for worse, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Marcus said, his voice strong and certain. Again, and always, and forever. Do you, Emma Chen, take Marcus to be your husband, in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, for richer and for poorer, for better and for worse, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. With all my heart, for all my life. Baby David Marcus Sullivan was born on a sunny July morning, healthy and perfect, and immediately adored by his 6 older siblings. Emma's pregnancy had been textbook normal, monitored carefully by a team of specialists, but progressing without complications. As Marcus held his newest son in the hospital room, surrounded by Emma and their other children, he marveled at the unexpected turns life could take. Less than a year ago, he'd thought his chance at happiness was over, that he would spend the rest of his life alone, with his regrets and what-ifs. Now he had everything he'd ever dreamed of, and more. A wife he adored, 7 incredible children, and a love story that had survived the worst and emerged stronger than ever. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked from her hospital bed, where she was being thoroughly cuddled by Sarah and Lily, while the boys took turns peering at their new brother with fascination. "Just all of this," Marcus said, gesturing around the chaotic, joy-filled room. "How we got here. How close we came to missing out on this entirely. How many things had to go exactly right and exactly wrong to bring us to this moment. Do you regret any of it? The pain, the separation, all those lost years?" Marcus considered the question seriously as he looked around at his family, his wife, his children, his second chance at the life he'd always wanted. "I regret the time we lost," he said finally. "I regret that I missed the first 4 years of their lives, that I wasn't there for you during the hardest times. But everything else, Emma, if we hadn't gone through what we did, we wouldn't be who we are now. We wouldn't appreciate what we have. We wouldn't know how precious and fragile and worth fighting for this kind of love really is." "Plus," Tommy added from his spot beside Marcus's chair, his serious 5-year-old face thoughtful, "if you and Mommy hadn't gotten divorced, Mommy wouldn't have met Dr. Sarah, and we wouldn't exist." "That's true," Marcus said, ruffling Tommy's dark hair that was so much like his own. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things in ways we never could have imagined. Like how Mommy got sick and we found out about baby David?" Alex asked with his typical logic that always managed to cut straight to the heart of complex situations. Emma laughed, the sound bright and musical in the hospital room. "Exactly like that. Sometimes the most beautiful surprises come disguised as problems we don't think we can handle." As the sun set through the hospital room window, casting golden light across the scene, Marcus looked around at his chaotic, beautiful, impossible family and felt his heart fill with gratitude so profound it took his breath away. They'd taken the long way around to get here, survived betrayal and heartbreak and years of separation. They'd made mistakes, hurt each other, kept secrets that should have been shared, but they'd also found their way back to each other through love and forgiveness and the determination to put their children's needs above their own pride and pain. Love, Marcus realized, wasn't just about the easy moments, the fairy tale beginnings and happily ever after endings. It was about choosing each other again and again, even when everything seemed stacked against you. It was about forgiveness and second chances and believing that some things were worth fighting for, no matter how impossible they seemed. And as baby David fell asleep in his arms, surrounded by the laughter of his siblings and the love of his parents, Marcus knew that every moment of pain had been worth it to get to this perfect, messy, wonderful life they'd built together. "I love you, Emma Sullivan Chen," he whispered across the room. "I love you too, Marcus Sullivan," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion and exhaustion and pure happiness. "All of you. Forever and always." Outside the hospital window, the first stars of evening began to appear, shining down on a family that had found their way back to each other against all odds. 7 children, 2 parents, and 1 love story that proved that sometimes the best endings come disguised as impossible beginnings. Their journey had been anything but conventional, filled with heartbreak and separation, secrets and surprises, loss and unexpected joy. But as Marcus looked around the room at his wife and children, this beautiful, chaotic, perfect family that almost hadn't existed, he wouldn't change a single moment of it. After all, the best love stories weren't the easy ones. They were the ones that survived everything life could throw at them and came out stronger on the other side. The ones that proved that love really could conquer all if you were brave enough to fight for it. And theirs was just beginning.